Hello once again. Today we're going to be looking at something very exciting. We're actually going to be doing this together, looking at a particular past question of which we're going to be providing solutions to these answers from this past question. And I'm also going to explain one or two reasons why the answers are what they are. So please quickly, let's get started with this. This is Ssce, okay? Now, we're going to be looking at the first one. This is all objective. All objective is not a theory exercise. We're looking at an objective exercise. Now, the first question is the ability of organisms to maintain a constant internal environment is known as. Now, the first option says diuresis. Now, diuresis is actually connected with the kidney, and when it is connected with the kidney, it is actually a disease of the kidney, which is called kidney diuresis. Now, osmosis has nothing to do, well, it also has a little to do with a balancing. Osmosis brings about a balance. It's actually a function that occurs in the body. We also have option C as homeostasis. Now, homeostasis is the correct option because it has to do with maintaining a fairly constant internal environment. And then option D is plasmolysis. Now, plasmolysis is also an aspect of osmosis. Plasmolysis is actually negative in the sense that the cells shrink after losing so much water, which will result in wilting and dying of the cells. But homeostasis is actually positive in the sense that it helps to maintain a fairly constant internal environment. Now, our internal environment also, as regards also our external environment, is not always constant. Of course, you can see that sometimes in some different places you find yourself, the temperature fluctuates. It can be cold today, it can be cold tomorrow, it can be hot the next minute, and so on. And the moisture content in a particular place might be very high at a particular time, and then after some time it might be very, very low. The same thing happens also within us, in our body. There are some times where the water content in the blood is very high, and there are some times where it is very low. There are some times when solutes like salts, sugars, digested food, and all the others, the content can be very high in the blood, and sometimes they can be very low. Now, if it is very high in the blood, it simply means that the blood will start taking in more water. And as it takes in more water, because now the content of the blood is actually hypertonic, and then the external environment can then be hypotonic. So osmosis has to do with the movement of water molecules from a region of lower concentration to a region of higher concentration. It simply means that the blood cells or the blood will start absorbing or taking in more water, and which of course will lead to the cells of the blood to begin to swell. Okay, once it begins to swell, it gets to the point where it might lyse. Okay, as I'm talking about the cells. Then also, if the content of the cells has much water, there's much water in the cells, then also in the external body fluids, which is the blood, you will discover that the cells will start losing water to the blood. But if the content of the cells is hypertonic, I just mentioned a bit of hypertonic. If it is hypertonic, it will absorb water. If it is hypotonic, it will lose water. That is, it is now undergoing either plasmolysis or hemolysis. And in whichever way, whether plasmolysis or hemolysis, it will always result to the death of the cells. So to ensure that the cells are alive and carry out their normal functions, there must be a fairly constant internal environment. And that process through which the body ensures that there is a fairly constant internal environment is what we call homeostasis. Okay, so it has to do with regulation of the internal environment. So our correct answer to this question is option C. Now, question 2, a diagram of a leaf was given, and the question is, the diagram below is an illustration of a mango leaf. An illustration of a mango leaf drawn by a student in a biology test. Now, the student failed the test, study it, and answer the question. All right. Now, let's look at the reason why the student failed this. Now, option A says, labels were wrong and the guidelines were not touching the structure. Now, let's take a look at what they are saying. Now, the labels were wrong. So let's look. Good, correct. The labels were wrong. The one that says margin is supposed to be mid-rib, while the mid-rib is supposed to be in place to be margin. But the mid-rib, as you can see, is not touching, the guidelines is not touching the structure. So we don't know where it is actually going to. We don't know the particular structure of the leaf it is actually identifying. Okay, so I think option A is correct, but let's go to option B. Option B says net venation shown were few. No, it's not correct. It is a mango leaf. They have this amount of number of net venation. You said they were very few. They were rough. No, I don't see it as rough. Not properly drawn. That's the correct way of drawing it. And wrongly placed. That's not true. So it means that option B is not the correct answer. Option C says leaf was tapered at the apex. Not really. And then the leaf stalk was too short. Not really. It is okay. And then the shape of the leaf was wrong. No, this is the correct shape of the leaf. So option C is not the correct answer. And then we also have option D, which says leaf venation should have been parallel. That's not true. A mango plant is actually a dicotyledonous plant. Where you have parallel venation is monocotyledonous plant. An example is cassava. An example is the grass, is the maize rather. We have maize. If you look at the leaf of a maize plant, it has parallel venation. And then the midrib, as one said, option D says, and the midrib should be thicker. That is not the correct answer. The midrib, whether it's okay as it is actually placed here by the student. But the major problem, I believe, that was actually wrong is option A. So option A is one of the reasons why the student actually failed the test. Now, also, let me just give a little tip on how to draw in biology questions, mostly when it relates to the theory aspects and also practicals. Now, whenever you are drawing, please, it is very important that you take note of your title. The title is very important. Like as I am seeing this particular thing, there is no title. And the title should also tell the view, or if there is any sectioning, that is if there is any cutting, the title should also carry alongside with the sectioning. But as it relates to this, we just have a front view, okay, of the leaf of a mango leaf. Okay, so the title is not spelled out here. Also, when drawing, please take note of the magnification. The magnification is also very important, and there is a way to calculate magnification. Okay, check in some of our videos. We explained how you can actually calculate your magnification. So magnification should be there. There should be also clarity of lines. As you can see in the diagram, there is no clarity of lines here. The clarity of lines here is 0. So they can't give you any mark for clarity of lines. Also, another thing again that should be important is the neatness of lines. Now, in terms of neatness of lines, at least he did a good job there. They were all horizontal. Please take note, it must all be horizontal. And not only that they are all horizontal, it must be ruled. It must be ruled. Use a ruler to make those lines, to make those guidelines. Now, which he did. But another thing that was very wrong in his neatness of lines is that the guidelines were not touching the structure. So that was where he got it wrong. That's where he failed the diagram. It wasn't actually touching the structure. And also, your labels must be accurate. And that was where also he made the wrong choice or the wrong thing. His labeling were not also correct. And please, also spelling must be correct for you to score a mark in biology. Your spellings also must be correct. So with these little tips, I believe you have learned how to actually present your diagrams properly in biology theory and practical questions. Now the next one, that is question 3, the same leaf. They said, which other feature of the diagram, if shown, would have earned the student more marks? Now look at A. They said color and size. No, in biology, practicals or theory, you don't color. Please, when drawing, avoid shading, avoid coloring. All right. Now the size is important, which has to do with, they will give you a size. They will always give you a size. I forgot to mention that they are also supposed to give you a size when drawing. They can say 8 cm to 10 cm. That's the size. And when drawing 8 cm to 10 cm, your diagram should not be less than 8 cm and it should not be more than 10 cm. That's what it means by 8 cm to 10 cm. I repeat again, 8 cm to 10 cm. It should not, your diagram should not be less than 8 cm. Your diagram should not be more than 10 cm. That's what 8 cm to 10 cm simply mean. So the correct option A is not actually correct. Option B, like I mentioned, that is it. Title and magnification. As you can see in the diagram here, there is no title and there is no magnification. Option C, habitat and agricultural qualities of the leaf. Now, it was not mentioned. Please, you're not supposed to write the habitat. You're not supposed to write the agricultural qualities of the leaf or any diagram unless you are asked to do so. Unless you are asked to do so. And by this, be very careful. Make sure you follow instructions as it is given in the question. The ones they will not tell you, the ones the examiner will not tell you is your title, your magnification, your size, your clarity of lines, neatness of lines, and labels. They will not tell you. So please bear this in mind. These 6 things are key things you should take note of whenever you're drawing any diagram. And then option D said spelling of labels correct and length of midribs wrong. The spelling of labels, I said it before, spelling must be correct to score. So the only one that actually explains why, if the student has included it, it would have given the students more marks, is title and magnification. So the correct answer is B. Let's move to the next one. Now the next question says, we have a diagram. They said the diagram below are illustrations of forms in which a particular group of organisms exist. Now study them and answer the question. Now if you look at the structure, we have different shapes, okay, different shapes. And they said it's an organism. Now, the best thing that comes to my mind, this organism represents a bacteria cell, okay? Now, a bacteria cell, bacteria can be grouped into 2, okay, based on your level or the O level. We have 2 groups of bacteria. We have bacteria that is bacteria based on oxygen requirement. We have also bacteria based on shape. The one based on oxygen requirement, we have 3 types of bacteria based on oxygen requirement. We have aerobic, that is they depend on oxygen or air. We have anaerobic, they don't depend on oxygen or air. And then we have facultative, it means they can survive both in both in aerobic and anaerobic conditions. Okay, then we also have the other aspects of bacteria, which is bacteria based on shapes. Now, based on shapes, we have about 4 or 5 different types of bacteria. Permit me to mention them. We have the cocci bacteria, which are spherical in shape. Now, if you look at the structures we have there, we have bacteria that are actually spherical in shape. You can see Roman figure 1 and Roman figure 2, they are spherical in shape. Now, bacteria that are spherical in shape, they are called cocci bacteria. Now, we have different types of cocci bacteria. We have the ones that form clusters. As you can see in Roman figure 1, they are in clustered form. Now, those ones in clustered form, they are called staphylococcus or staphylococci, plural form, cocci, singular form, coccus. So, we have staphylococci, they are always in clusters. Then we have the ones that are in chains, branched chains. Now, those ones in chains or straight chains, they are called streptococci. Okay, then we also have the ones that occurs in pairs, that is in pairs, just two. Now those ones, they are called diplococci. And then we have the ones that occurs in fours. That's, you have 1, 2, 3, 4 clustered, 1, 2, 3, 4 clustered, 1, 2, 3, 4 clustered. Now those ones are called tetrads. All right, so they are found under cocci bacteria. Remember I said cocci bacteria, they are spherical in shape. We also have the bacillus, or you can call it in plural form bacilli. Now those ones are rod-like in shape, and you're going to see it in Roman figure 3. So Roman figure 3, they are bacillus, okay, or bacilli, they are rod-like in shape. We also have the ones that are spiral in shape, spiral or twisted. Now, those ones that are spiral or twisted, we call them spirulae. An example is Treponema pallidum that causes syphilis. All right. Now, for bacillus, we have for Roman figure 4, that is the spirulae. Okay, that's the spirulae. Now, they are spiral or twisted, like I said. By example of the bacteria that causes what? Syphilis. And then we have Roman figure 5. Now, Roman figure 5, you can see they look like they have, actually, what you see as those slender things at the end, you see something like a curve, and then you now see something like a flagellum underneath. Now, that is just the flagellum, because some bacteria, they are motile, while some are not motile. Like Roman figure 4 or 5 rather, they are actually motile. Why? Because they possess flagellum. Now, they are curved like, that's what it's supposed to be. And those ones that are curved are called vibro. So I think we have about 4 of them. We have cocci, we have bacillus, we have spirulae, and then we have vibrobacteria. In fact, vibrobacteria is what causes cholera, which is called vibrocholerae. That's the name of the bacteria, vibrocholerae. So now if you look at that particular question, they said which group of organism is illustrated? The correct answer to this question is bacteria. So it is not a virus, it is not a fungi, it is not a protozoa, but it is a bacteria. Next question. It says the diagram below are illustrations of forms in which a particular bacteria, okay, we've mentioned that. Now look at the question underneath. It says, in which of the illustrated forms does the organism that causes cholera exist? Now I have just mentioned it. I believe you should be able to answer that question without much explanation. And that one answer is Roman figure 5. I said it's curved, and it is called, the name of the bacteria that causes cholera is called vibrocholerae. Vibrocholerae. All right, moving to the next question. They said, study the list of organisms below and use them to answer the questions below. Okay, so we're answering these questions. The question 1, Roman figure 1 says hydra. Roman figure 2, owl. Roman figure 3, snake. Roman figure 4, snail. All right, now we're looking at each of these. Now they said arrangement of the organism in order of increasing complexities. Order of increasing complexities. Now if you go back to the topic on classifications of living things, you should be able to answer this. If you look at the, what do we call it? If you look at kingdom, mostly they're all animals, as you can see. We have hydra, owl, snake, snail. They are all animals. So we can put that classification under kingdom Animalia. Now, under kingdom Animalia, you should know the phylums. Now, the phylums can actually explain their hierarchy. Okay, so let me give you the phylums in their order of hierarchy. Now, the first one is is the phylum Porifera. An example of a phylum Porifera is the sponge. If you look at those options there, we don't have sponge. Okay, the next one is Colentrata, phylum Colentrata. An example of a phylum Colentrata is Hydra. So it means order of increasing order of complexities. When we say increasing, you're starting from the smallest to the biggest. So the smallest, so number 1, Roman figure 1 should come first. So Hydra is 1. Then after Hydra, we have the platyhelminths, phylum platyhelminths. Now, phylum platyhelminths, an example is, phylum platyhelminths are the flatworms. Example is the planaria. We have tapeworm. They fall under platyhelminths. After platyhelminths, we have the next one, okay, Porifera Colentrata, platyhelminths, that's 3. Number 4 is phylum Nematoda. Now, nematodas are round worms, not flatworms. An example is the Ascaris lumbricoid. We also have the hookworm. We have the filaria worms. They all come under nematoda, okay? And if you look at the options we have there, we don't have flatworms, or we don't have roundworms. Next one, which is number 5, is supposed to be Annelida. Now, Annelida is a segmented worm. An example of a segmented worm is earthworm, okay? Then we now move to number 6. Number 6 is phylum Mollusca. Phylum Mollusca. Now, under phylum Mollusca, we have the snails. We have the snails. We have snails. We have octopus. We have slugs, and so on. They fall under phylum Mollusca. Phylum Mollusca. Now, that's snails. So the first one is Hydra in terms of order of increasing complexity. We have Hydra, and then we have snail, which is 1 Roman figure 4. I believe you're now seeing where your answer should be. Okay, 1 Roman figure 4, and then after mollusca, we have the arthropodas. Now, the arthropoda, we have different types of classes of arthropoda. We have the crustaceans, which are the crabs. We have the insecta, which are the insects, like the cockroach, termites, grasshoppers, flies, mosquitoes. They all fall under this. And then we have the next one, which is the arachnids, which are the spiders, the scorpions. And then we have the myriapoda, which is the millipede and the centipede. So they don't fall under it. So the options we have there, no one is there. It falls nowhere. And then we have the echinodermata. Now, the echinodermata is the sea anemone. We have the sea urchins. We have the all these others, starfish and all that. They fall, sea cucumber, they all fall under echinodermata. And then after the echinodermata, we have the chordata. Now, after chordata, we have other classes, about 5 classes of chordata. We have the Pisces, which there is no fish there. We have amphibians, which includes frogs and toads. There is none there. Newts and so on. There is none there. And then we have the reptiles. The reptiles are the snakes, the lizards, the crocodiles, and so on. You can find that there is a snake there. So we have Roman figure 1, Roman figure 4, Roman figure 3, and then finally we have the owl, which is a bird, and that's Roman figure what? 2. So the correct answer to this particular question is option C. As we can see here, Roman figure 1, Hydra, Roman figure 4, snail, Roman figure 3, snake, and then Roman figure 2, owl. Okay, so that is the answer. We're moving to the next option. Still the same question. They said the phylum of the organism labeled 4. Phylum of the organism labeled 4, that is snail. If you could remember, we talked about this just in the previous topic, the previous question. We talked about this and we said the correct answer is mollusca. So the answer is mollusca. So mollusca is actually the correct answer, mollusca. All right, moving ahead. Next question. Now we have the question of a cell. This is the structure of a cell. Now by the look of it, this is a large, that's Roman figure 1 from the look of it. That is a large food vacuole, okay, an empty space, that's a food vacuole. Now let's read the question or the instructions there. They said the diagram below is an illustration of a cell in which photosynthesis takes place. Now, so that's a plant cell. Now, study it and answer the question. In which of the labeled parts would molecules of water and carbon dioxide combine to form sugar? Now, the part where there is a combination of carbon dioxide and water to form sugar, in fact, that is the simple thing, photosynthesis. What is photosynthesis? Photosynthesis is the process by which green plants manufacture their food, which is sugar, in the presence of what? Carbon dioxide and water, okay? But it must be a green plant. It must be a green plant. Now, what makes actually a plant green is a pigment which we call, or you can call it a palisade cell, which is called chloroplast. Now, Roman figure 1 is not a chloroplast. That is the vacuoles, the food vacuoles. Roman figure 2, that is the nucleus, which carries hereditary materials. Roman figure 3, as you can see, that is the cell wall. Roman figure, or the other one has already been said, it is called the cytoplasm. And then Roman figure 4, as you can see, is a small spherical knob structure. That is the chloroplast. So our correct answer to this question is Roman figure 4, and that is chloroplast. Moving to the next question, still the same structure, plant cell. They said the oxygen gas formed in the cell diffuses out of the cytoplasm into the airspace through the part labeled. Now, how is oxygen gas actually formed? One of the byproducts of photosynthesis is actually the release of oxygen. Okay, now the two main byproducts of photosynthesis is sugar, which can also be called glucose, is sugar, and oxygen. Now, oxygen is actually a gas that can be removed from the cell of that plant cell, or from the plant cell, through not the food vacuoles, because actually it didn't take place in the food vacuoles, not from the nucleus, not from the cytoplasm, and the food vacuoles actually came out from Roman figure 4, which is the chloroplast. But how does it leave the cell? That is the question. How does it leave or diffuse out of the entire plant cell? Now, it diffuses out of the entire plant cell through the cell wall or the cell membrane. So let's assume this is the cell wall. So it diffuses out through the cell wall, and that is Roman figure 3, and that's option C. So let's look at this particular question, and it reads, an example of a process that involves osmosis is. Now, before we start looking at the options, which is option A to D, I'd like us to actually understand the term osmosis and actually differentiate it from the term diffusion. Now, first of all, what is actually diffusion? Diffusion is actually the movement of molecules or ions. Please take note of it. Molecules or ions, and of course ions can be solids, it can be liquids, and it can also be gaseous. So movement of molecules or ions, or molecules can also be solid, liquid, or gaseous. So movement of ions from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration until it is evenly distributed. Then also in terms of osmosis, osmosis is the movement of water molecules from a region of lower concentration to the region of higher concentration through a semi-permeable membrane. Now, please note the difference. In terms of diffusion, there are so many differences though, but I just want to point out this particular difference. I think it will help us answer the question. Now, for diffusion, it has to do with movement of ions. Now, like I said, or molecules, like I said, these molecules can either be solid, liquid, or gas, all right? Now, but in terms of osmosis, it is specifically mentioned water molecules. So it must be only water. So osmosis deals with the movement of water molecules only. Now, let's take a look at the options later, A to D. Now, A says movement of digested food from ileum into the blood capillaries. Now, if you go through the topic on digestive system, when you start looking at digestion process in man, the digested food in the ileum passes or they diffuse into the blood capillaries through the villi. So it is by diffusion. And how is it by diffusion? Because it is just the movement of digested food from the region of higher concentration, which is at the ileum, and it is now moving to the region of lower concentration, which is at the what? The capillaries. So it is moving from higher to lower. The same thing, look at option B. Option B says translocation of starch from the leaves. Now, the leaves is the site of photosynthesis. That is where starch is actually produced. Okay, so it is moving from a region where starch is high in concentration to a part of the plant where it is little or none. Okay, so that's translocation. And what is translocation? Movement of manufactured food from one part of the plant to another, mostly from the part where it is actually produced to the part where it is needed in the part of the plant, okay, on the body of the plants. Then option C says reabsorption. So let's go back to option B. Option B simply means it is diffusion. So it is also moving from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration. Then if you look at option C says reabsorption of food nutrients from the kidney into the blood capillaries. Now, when food or blood containing digested food and every other essential materials enter into the kidney to be filtered and purified, when it passes through ultrafiltration and enters into the proximal convoluted tubules and Henle's loop, there you experience selective reabsorption of some important food materials or essential materials back into the bloodstream. Now there, they are high in concentration and then they are diffusing into the bloodstreams, okay, or blood capillaries. So it is also by diffusion. But look at option D. It says movement of water molecules or movement of water. And by definition of osmosis, we said it is the movement of water molecules. So it has to do with movement of water from root hairs. Now, in the root hairs, we have more of water molecules than in the cortical cell, which is found in the plant. All right? In the plant. So it has to do with movement of water molecules from a region of lower concentration. So at the root hairs, rather, you have low concentration of water, okay, or low concentration of there is high concentration of low concentration of water, high concentration of water rather. That means it is diluted. The concentration is low. When in chemistry, when a solution or a substance has more water, we say it's diluted. When it has less water, we say it's concentrated. So in the root hairs, we have sort of like a concentration that is low or diluted. So it is water molecules moving from the concentration that is low, where you have more water, to a place where you don't have more water. So option D is the correct answer. That is an example of a process that involves osmosis, that involves the process of osmosis. Next question says, growth in animals differ from that in plants because growth in Okay, growth in animals differ from growth in plants. Why? Now, one of the major reasons why growth in animals differ from growth in plants is because plants undergo unlimited growth, that they continue growing all through their life. So, but in animals, growth is actually limited, or you can say growth is definite in animals, while growth is indefinite in plants, or growth is unlimited in plants. Also, in plants, growth is observed at the apical regions, at the apexes. But in animals, it is observed every part of the body. So if you look at option A, it says plant is intercalary. B says animal is apical. No, animal is not apical. C, they said plants is from within and then has nothing to do with growth. And then option D says plant is definite. So the correct answer is that plant is definite. So plant is definite. Next question. Now look at the structure we have here. That is the structure of the skull. They said the diagram below is an illustration of a structure in the skeletal system of humans. Study it and answer the questions. Study it and answer the questions. Now look at that. The illustrated structure is a part of what? Now, if you look at the human skeleton is actually divided into two main parts. We have the axial skeleton, and then we have the appendicular skeleton. The axial skeleton is actually made up of, the skull. It is made up of the vertebral column, which is also known as the backbone. It is made up of the sternum, which is the breastbone, and then it is made up of the ribs. I repeat, the axial skeleton is made up of the skull. It is made up of the vertebral column, which is the backbone. It is made up of the sternum, and then it is made up of the ribs. While the appendicular skeleton is made up of the limbs, which is the forelimbs and hind limbs, and then it is also made up of the girdles, which is the pectoral girdle, and then we have the pelvic girdles. Okay, so if you look at this, the question here, they said the illustrator structure is a part of, it is not part of the cervical vertebrae. The cervical vertebrae is actually a part of the vertebral column, which is the backbone. Cervical vertebrae is the first vertebrae in the backbone and is located at the neck region. The skull is at the head region. Option B says axial skeleton, and that is the correct answer. Option C says is the axis vertebrae. Now the axis and the atlas, in fact the atlas is the first vertebrae or the first backbone in the cervical vertebrae, or the first backbone, while the second backbone is the axis vertebrae. So the axis vertebrae is located also at the neck, not the head. And then finally we have the appendicular skeleton. I told you that there's two parts of this human skeleton is the axial and the appendicular skeleton. So the correct answer to this particular question is option B, which is the axial skeleton. Next. Now look at this question again. Still the skull. They said an individual was involved in a car accident and the illustrated structure, that is the skull, was badly injured. Now take a look at it. Which of the following structures would most likely be affected? Which of the following structures will most likely be affected? Now, what are the delicate parts of the skull? Of course, the skull is a bone, and it protects. One of the functions of the bone is to protect. Now, if you look at this, we have the sockets. We have an eye socket. So if the head is affected, it can affect the eyes. Or if the skull is affected, it can affect the eyes. It can affect the nose. It can affect the teeth. It can affect the ears. It can also affect the brain within. All right? These are areas that can be affected. I repeat, the eyes, the nose, the teeth, even the tongue and the teeth can be affected, the ears, and then the brain. Now let's take a look at some of the options we have here. Option A says lumbar, eye, and teeth. Now, the eye is found at the skull, the teeth is found at the skull, but the lumbar is not found at the skull. The lumbar is one of the parts of the vertebrae or of the backbone. One of the parts of the vertebral column or the backbone. Now, I think after the lumbar vertebrae is located at the upper abdomen after the thoracic vertebrae. The thoracic is found at the chest region, and below the chest region from your diaphragm downwards a bit, you have the lumbar, okay? The lumbar vertebrae. I think they are about 5 in number, so it is not found at the skull. Option B says the ear, which is found at the skull. We have the brain, correct, at the skull, and then they said the hinge joint. Now, the hinge joint is actually a type of joint that allows movement to and fro in only one direction. And where do we find the hinge joint? We find the hinge joint here at the elbow mostly. It's found at the elbow, okay? We also find it at the knee region, or yes, at the knee. That's where we find the hinge joint. Now, the elbow and the knee, they are not located at the skull. So that option is wrong. Now, option C says the eye, the cerebellum, and the ear. The eye is found at the skull. The ear is found at the skull. And then the cerebellum is a part of the brain. In fact, it can be found at the hind brain. The brain is divided into 3 major parts. We have the forebrain, the midbrain, and then the hindbrain. Now, the hindbrain, one of the most important part of the hindbrain is the cerebellum. Now, the cerebellum actually controls muscular activities, actions, all right, muscular actions. So it can be affected. The brain is found in the skull. So the correct answer to this particular question is option C. But let's look at option D, what they said. Option D says clavicle. Now, the clavicle is your collarbone. This is the collarbone, okay? We also have the tongue. Of course, it's found in the mouth, but the clavicle is not found in the head. The tongue is found in the skull, rather. Then we also have the pelvis. Now, the pelvis is the hip, okay? The hip is also not found at the skull. So the correct answer, like I said, is option C. Moving ahead. The tricuspid valve is located between, now the tricuspid valve is actually located between the right auricle and the right ventricle. Right auricle and right ventricle. Now, option A says left auricle and left ventricle. Now, what valve is located between the left auricle and left ventricle? We have the bicuspid valve. You know, most persons always have this confusion between the bicuspid and the tricuspid valve. Now, the bicuspid valve is always found at the between the left auricle and ventricle. Okay, while the tricuspid valve is usually found between the right auricle and right ventricle. Please don't forget this. And also, one of the major functions of the valve is to prevent the backflow of blood. So the correct answer and option to this question is option D. Now, this is the structure of the respiratory system in man. Respiratory system in man. Now, let's read this question there. They said the diagram below is an illustration of some structures used for gaseous exchange in humans. Study it and answer the questions below. Now, they said the part labeled 1, 2, 3, and 4 respectively are. Now, for you to be able to actually understand and answer these questions correctly, you must have an understanding of the structure, okay, on compositions of the respiratory system in man. Now, the respiratory system in man consists of the nostrils, okay, that's also the pathway through which air enters and leaves the body, enters into the body and leaves the body. That is breathing in and also breathing out. Okay, like I said before, the nostrils, so air passes through the nostrils. From the nostrils, it passes through what we call the pharynx. Okay, from the pharynx, it enters the larynx. The larynx is called the voice box. In fact, Roman figure 1 is the larynx. As we can see here in this structure, there is no face. Okay, the head is missing. So immediately after the nostrils, immediately you will move a little bit from the tongue and going through the throat, you have the pharynx. So from the pharynx, we have the larynx, which is also called the voice box. Now the voice box is actually made up of cartilage. And then from the voice box, immediately after the voice box, you enter into another canal or channel where you have rings of cartilage, Now those rings of cartilage, they are called windpipe, and that is the trachea. So the trachea is the windpipe. So from the windpipe or from the trachea, we enter into the bronchus. So these are the bronchus. From the bronchus, we enter into smaller channels or networks, which you can see like branches. Now, those smaller networks or channels are what we call the bronchioles. And please take note, the bronchus, the bronchioles, and you can see at the end of those channels, you can see small sacs, sac-like structures. We can call them sac bags, air sac bags. Now, those air sac bags are called alveoli. So that is where air is stored temporarily until gaseous exchange takes place. And the bronchus, the bronchioles, and the alveoli, they are all found in the lungs. So if you have this understanding, let's take a look at the question again. They said the part labeled 1. We said 1 is the larynx, which is called the voice box. Part Roman figure 2. Roman figure 2 is the trachea. Are you checking it? Are you seeing the answers there? So option D is actually looking like what we've just explained. Then option 3 or Roman figure 3, you see they are pointing, the arrow is actually, or the guidelines are actually pointing at the larynx, the bronchioles. So you can see after the trachea, we have the bronchiole. Roman figure 4 is actually pointing at the bronchus. Okay, in plural form, it can be called bronchi. While the bronchiole is singular, plural form is called bronchioles. So the correct answer to this particular question is option D. Option D. Next question, still on respiratory system. They said here, the part labeled 3 will be found in where? The part labeled 3. Of course, I told you that's the bronchioles, and I told you that the bronchioles, the bronchus, the bronchioles, and the alveoli, they are all found inside of the lungs. They are not found in the heart. This is not the heart. They are not found in the kidney. This is not the kidney. This is also not the sternum. The sternum is a bone. All right. So the correct answer is B, which is the lungs. All right. Now, which of the following hormones is wrongly paired with its secretory organs? Now, secretory organs are organs that produce secretions. They produce secretions, and these secretions can be antibodies, they can be hormones, they can also be enzymes. All right. Now, we have option A. Pancreas actually secretes the hormone called insulin, and insulin is actually responsible for regulation of blood sugar. Okay, it converts excess glucose in the blood into glycogen, which is then stored in the liver. Option B is estrogen and ovary. Of course, the ovary produces two hormones, which are estrogen and progesterone. Now, the estrogen and progesterone, they are responsible for the development of secondary sexual characteristics in females. And then we have option C, which is oxytocin and hypothalamus. Of course, the hypothalamus, somehow, I think I was actually thinking of the pituitary gland, produces oxytocin. I think so. The pituitary gland produces oxytocin. Probably hypothalamus also produces oxytocin, and oxytocin is actually responsible for the flow of breast milk in females, probably during breastfeeding and all that. And then also option D, but actually it might not be, but it is actually involved in, oxytocin is actually involved in reproduction, mostly in females. Reproduction mostly in females. And then option D says adrenaline and the kidney. Now, the kidney is not an endocrine gland. It is not a secretory organ, okay? The kidney is not a secretory organ. But there is actually a secretory organ found at the top of the kidney, and that is the adrenal gland. Now, the adrenal gland secretes the hormone called adrenaline. And adrenaline is actually an emergency hormone. So the correct one, or the correct answer, which shows hormones that are wrongly paired with secretory organs, it's option D. Option D. The next one is that the eye defect caused by an uneven curvature of the cornea or the lens or both is caused by is what? Myopia is not the answer. Myopia is also called short-sightedness. Short-sightedness, okay, where the person has the inability of seeing objects that are very, very far, okay. Objects must be very close for that particular person with this eye defect to be able to focus the lens on this thing, because the lens is usually, the lens is actually abnormal and focuses image before the retina, okay. Then option B says astigmatism. That is the correct one. And during astigmatism, it is actually caused by uneven curvature of the cornea or the lens. It is like slightly curved. But in terms of a normal person that doesn't have any eye defect, the cornea or the lens is not curved. It is somehow spherical. It's somehow spherical. Now, someone suffering from astigmatism always has blurred vision. Blurred vision. And then option C says presbyopia. Now, presbyopia mostly happens to people that are actually aging. Okay, most times it begins at the age of 40, and when the person gets to 60, 65, it becomes a little bit worse. Some persons believe that presbyopia have no corrective measures, all right? Has no corrective measures like we have corrective measures for myopia and hypermetropia, which is the long-sightedness. But presbyopia, they said actually it doesn't have. Okay, it comes with age. And then option D is hypermetropia, which has to do with long-sightedness. The person is not able to actually see clearly objects that are close, but you can see clearly objects that are far. And then that is simply because images are formed behind the retina. They are formed behind the retina instead of being formed on the retina, okay? And presbyopia, actually, the person is not able to focus objects, cannot focus on, you can't get an active, an active focus on a particular object object that is actually close to you. So that is what we call presbyopia. But the correct answer to this particular question is astigmatism. Astigmatism. Next question, the androsome. Now, androsome, this particular topic is found in reproduction in flowering plants. Now, flowers are actually the reproductive part of a plant. So, taking a look at the structure of the flower, taking a look at the structure of a flower, the flower consists of reproductive parts. We have the receptacle. We have after the receptacle, we have the sepals. After the sepals, okay, before the receptacle, we have the pedicel or the stalk that attaches to the branches of a plant. And then we have the receptacle. From the receptacle, we have the sepals. From the sepals, we have the petals, which is brightly colored and plays a major role in pollination. From the petals, we then have the stamens. Depending on the type of flower, we have the the androsome rather, and the gynosome. Now, the androsome is actually the male part of the flower. Now, a collection of of what we call a stamen is what forms the androecium. Okay, one stamen consists of the filament, which is the long part, carrying an anther, and the anther is impregnated with pollen grains. So the correct answer to this particular question is the stamens, not the ovules. The ovules is found in the gynoecium, which is the female part. The filament is a part of the stamen. That is option C. Now, sperm is not part of the sex cell of plants. Plants don't have sperm cells. What they have as their own sperm cells is pollen grains. So the sperm cells of plants can be likened or can be called pollen grains. Now, sperm cells are mostly in humans or mostly in mammals. All right, so not in terms of plants. So the correct answer to this particular question is option B. Option B. Next question. Placentation in fruits is referred to as the A. Now, before we go into this, let's look at the meaning of placentation. What exactly is placentation? Now, placentation is actually the arrangement. That's what they are looking for. It is the arrangement of the ovules within the ovary of a flower. Now, the ovary is the female part, is in the female part of a flower. The ovary contains the ovules, which is the female reproductive sex cell or the female gamete of a flower. Listen, the female gamete of a flower, of a flowering plant, is the ovule. And the ovary produces the ovule. Now, after fertilization, it is the ovule that becomes a seed carrying the embryo, while the ovary becomes the fruit. Okay? Now, we have different types of placentation, about 5 of them. We have the marginal placentation. We have the free central placentation. We have the axial placentation. We have the parietal placentation, and then we have the basal placentation. These are the different types of placentation. But the question says placentation in fruit is referred to as, the correct answer is option C, which is arrangement of ovules in the ovary of a flower. Arrangement of ovules in the ovary of a flower. So let's look at this particular question, the next question. They said, which of the following processes does not occur during photosynthesis? Now, for you to be able to answer this particular question, you should note what photosynthesis one more time is. Now, photosynthesis is actually a process by which green plants manufacture their food in the presence of sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide. So in other words, what we're looking at is green plants, and green plants, they must have chlorophyll. Okay, so any plant without chlorophyll is not green. So chlorophyll must be present. These are the factors or conditions for photosynthesis to occur based on this definition. So we have chlorophyll, we have sunlight, we have carbon dioxide, and then we have water. Now, please note, during photosynthesis, if you look at the chemical equation of photosynthesis, during photosynthesis, it is carbon dioxide reacting with water in the presence of chlorophyll and sunlight to produce glucose, which is sugar, plus oxygen that is given off. So during photosynthesis, oxygen is given off, not carbon dioxide is given off. Rather, carbon dioxide is used and oxygen is evolved. All right? Now, also take note, during photosynthesis, 2 stages are involved. We have the light reaction stage, we have the dark reaction stage. Now, the reason why it is called the light reaction stage is because it occurs during the day. Dark reaction stage, it occurs mostly at night. It occurs at night. Now, light reaction stage, in light reaction state, water is actually splitted into hydrogen ion and hydroxide ion. And then other reactions takes place. In fact, the splitting of water is called photolysis of water. Now, why is it called photolysis or photolysis? Photo talks about light. Lysis talks about splitting of water. So it is the splitting of water using light energy. So the energy from the sun is actually used, which occurs during the day, to split water into hydrogen ion and hydroxide ion. The hydrogen ion is used to reduce an enzyme, which is called NADPH, or a coenzyme, while the hydroxide ion undergoes further reaction to give off oxygen as the gas that is given off during photosynthesis. The dark reaction state, carbon dioxide reacts with the hydrogen from the NADPH to form a complex sugar, to form sugars which can be glucose and so on by series of chemical reactions which are controlled by enzymes, and then glucose is actually formed. So that is what actually happens during the dark reaction stage. Now let's approach these options armed with this understanding and information. Option A, carbon 4 oxide is evolved. That's wrong. Carbon 4 oxide is not evolved during photosynthesis. Option B says water is split. Yes, water is split. If you listen to the explanation I gave, I said we have light reaction stage and dark reaction stage. What happens in the light reaction stage is that water is split using what? The energy from the sun. All right, so B is correct, water is split. Option C, oxygen is evolved. Yes, we said oxygen is one of the byproducts, one of the gases that are actually produced, given off. And then option D says energy from the sunlight is absorbed. Yes, during the light reaction stage, it is actually the energy from the sunlight or from the sun that is actually used to split water into hydrogen ion and hydroxide ion. So the correct answer to this question, which of the following processes does not occur during photosynthesis? The correct answer is A. Okay, carbon dioxide or carbon 4 oxide is evolved. Next question. Stunted growth. Small yellow leaves in plants are symptoms of deficiencies of, now stunted growth, yellow leaves. Please listen to the word yellow leaves. So it means when the leaves are yellow, it means they are not green. Photosynthesis can't occur. And there are several organisms that are actually responsible for yellowing of leaves. Now we call that chlorosis. Chlorosis. Now chlorosis is one of the deficiencies of iron. One of the deficiencies of iron. Though magnesium and nitrogen are also responsible for the formation of chlorophyll. Okay, formation of chlorophyll. But it is actually chlorosis that brings about stunted growth and small yellow leaves. Though iron also is also responsible for the formation of chlorophyll. Next, the structure that its action could result in choking when talking and eating at the same time. That's even a bad habit. I could remember when growing up, my parents usually say when you're talking while eating, they say it's a bad habit. So you don't talk while eating because there is a possibility that you might choke from the food you are actually eating. Now, what actually results or brings about the choking? That's what the question is all saying. Now, if you take a look at respiratory system and you check the pathways through which air passes, we said it passes through the mouth, through the nostrils. From the nostrils, before it gets to the esophagus, before it gets to the pharynx, it must pass through a bell, sort of like a bell-like structure. If you open your mouth in front of your mirror wide open, you are going to see something that dangles like a bell at the roof of your mouth. It dangles. Now, that is what we call the epiglottis. The epiglottis. Now, when you are eating, the epiglottis covers the pharynx, okay, which is a pathway for air. It covers the pharynx. so that the food you are actually eating can pass through the esophagus. Because when food enters into the mouth, after being masticated and lubricated with saliva and rolled by the tongue, it is being swallowed or passed through the esophagus. And as is, if while you're eating, you're talking, the epiglottis might not be able to cover the pharynx while you're talking and while eating. So the food might mistakenly pass through your pharynx. And of course, when it enters into your pharynx, you see that choking. The person starts coughing, the person starts choking, and it actually can be fatal if probably what enters into the pharynx has gone so actually deep. It can be fatal. And of course, I believe most of you might have had that experience. Is actually very painful and not pleasant at all. So I will also still advise, while eating, don't talk. Don't talk while eating. So what actually results in the choking when talking and eating at the same time is actually the epiglottis. It's based on the action of the epiglottis. Okay, so the correct answer is A. 24. They said the food substance that would produce the highest amount of energy. The highest amount of energy. Now, the highest amount of energy, most persons believe that it is actually produced by carbohydrates. Now, the highest amount of energy is not produced by carbohydrates. Glucose? No. So glucose is a simple sugar. It is a form or type of carbohydrate. It is not. So the correct answer is also not amino acid. Amino acid is the simplest form of proteins. So also still not proteins, not amino acid, not glucose, but the food substance that produces the highest amount of energy is actually fats and oils. So fats and oils produces very high amount, a huge amount of energy for you to use or for your body to make use of. All right, next question. Organisms that feed on dead, decaying tissues of other organisms are known as organisms. Now, this is actually, they said, that feed on other organisms. So we have nutrition here. Now, we have two types of nutrition. We have autotrophic, we have heterotrophic. Okay? Now, autotrophic, they can manufacture their own food, while heterotrophic, they depend on other organisms for food. Okay? So what we're actually talking about, we're saying organisms, they feed on other organisms. So the term autotrophic is out. So if you look at option B can never be your answer. Can never be your answer. Because option B is autotrophs. Autotrophs are actually organisms that manufacture their own food. They don't depend on other organisms for food. Then we come to heterotrophs. Now we can say heterotrophs, fine. But heterotrophs, we have different types of heterotrophs. We have what we call holozoic. Now, these are organisms that depend on other organisms and also on plants for food. Okay? Under holozoic, we have omnivores. Omnivores, they feed on both plants and animals. We have herbivores that feeds on only plants. We have carnivores that feeds on only flesh or other animals. All right? Then we also have another type of heterotrophs apart from holozoic. We also have parasitic. Now, these are organisms that derive nutrients from other organisms, and at the end, they bring harm to the organisms they derive benefits or nutrients from. So that's parasitic. So keep your eyes on the question. And then option D says saprophytes. So we have holozoic, we have parasitic, we have saprophytic. Now, saprophytes or saprophytic nutrition is a type of nutrition in which organisms, or a type of heterotrophic nutrition in which organisms feed on other organisms by feeding on their dead and decaying tissues or bodies. All right. So saprophytes are those organisms. Saprophytic nutrition is a process, is a type of nutrition, while saprophytes are the organisms that carries out saprophytic nutrition. An example is bacteria and fungi. Most organisms that bring about decomposition, like housefly, also they are saprophytes. We have termites, they are also saprophytes. Snails, to an extent, they are also what? Saprophytes. Okay? Bacteria, fungi, they are all saprophytes. All right? So they feed on dead and decaying tissues of other organisms. So the correct answer to this particular question is D, saprophytes. Next question. The type of nutrition in which organisms take solid organic materials into their bodies is, now, if you look at as they take in, that's they feed. So autotrophic nutrition is also cancelled out of this. Then we are now looking at heterotrophic nutrition, still on nutrition, heterotrophic. Now, I told you of saprophytic. Most times they feed on fluid, not usually solids. Okay, then yes, it's on fluids because they will break down those dead and dead organic matters into substances they can absorb. All right, so sometimes it's like fluid-like. Okay, not really solids. And then if you talk about parasitic, also parasitic nutrition, which is also a heterotrophic type of nutrition, that also involves feeding on fluid. An example of a parasite is tapeworm. We have hookworm. We have ascaris. We have lice. We have ticks. No, they feed on blood. They feed on fluid. Okay, so it is not a solid organic material. Then the one that actually feeds on solid organic material, they are holozoic. Now, we mentioned three different types of holozoics. We said we have omnivores. An example of an omnivore is man. You said it feeds on both plants and animals. Now, when you eat meat, is it solid? Yes, fish is solid. Plants like yam, rice, they are all solids. Then in terms of herbivores, they feed on leaves, they feed on plants. Plants are also solids. In terms of carnivores, they feed on other animals that are flesh. That's also what? Solids. So the correct answer to this particular question is A. Now, symbiotic nutrition is a kind of biological association in which two organisms are involved and they benefit nutrients, or they benefit nutrients from each other. This one benefits from this person and the other person also benefits from the other. Okay? And then option C, we've mentioned saprophytic and then parasitic. So the correct answer to this question is actually holozoic. Holozoic. Next, the mouth part of a grasshopper are adapted for what? Now, I can also still relate this to nutrition, because if you're looking at nutrition, we have feeding mechanisms. We have different feeding mechanisms, close to 5. We have the absorbing mechanism, which is found in tapeworm, where they have hooks and suckers as modifications, okay, for attachment. And then they have body surfaces for absorbing their host, the food of their host. We also have biting and chewing, which is in grasshoppers. Okay, biting and chewing, which is in grasshoppers. Their mouth is modified with mandibles and maxillae, and also you have the labium and labium for biting, chewing, grind, and all that. Then we also have the sucking mechanism, which is found in housefly. You find it in butterfly, in mosquitoes, where they have stylets and proboscis. And then we also have the grinding mechanism, which is found mostly in man, where we have different sets of teeth or types of teeth. We have the incisor for cutting, canine for tearing of flesh, premolar, molars for grinding, and so on. So when we are looking at the mouth part of grasshoppers, they are modified for biting and chewing. So option A says chewing, option B says grinding, option C says sucking, option D says absorption. Now, absorption is for tapeworm, sucking, which is option C, is for housefly, butterfly, mosquito, Option D, grinding, is for man and other mammals. And then option C is for grasshopper. Okay. Next question, a group of organisms belonging to different species that coexist in the same habitat and interact is referred to as. They cohabit and interact. Now, population is the total number, is the sum total of, or is the total number of organisms of the same species living in a particular place at a particular time. They are not talking about interaction. They said the total number. Then we have biosphere. Now, the biosphere is the zone of the earth where living organisms can be found. Now, ecological niche, which is option C, talks about the specific area where an organism can be found and the specific role that organism plays. It's not talking about interaction. But when you come to community, community has to do with groups of organisms of different species, okay, that are coexisting together and interacting in the same what? Habitat. So the correct answer to this particular question is option D. Next question. Which of the following factors is the main problem facing xerophytes? Now, what are actually xerophytes? Xerophytes are actually plants that can survive in extremely dry places. Now, plants that can survive in wet places, aquatic or wet places, they are called hydrophytes. While the ones that can survive in places that are not too wet or not too dry, they are called mesophytes. All right. So xerophytes, what is their main problem? What are the main challenges they actually face? Now, the main challenges xerophytes actually face is actually water, availability of water. Okay, they don't have enough water, and because they don't have enough water, they are actually structurally adapted to conserve water. So option A says conservation of excess water. Yes, an example is the cactus plant. Okay, the cactus plant is actually structurally adapted to conserve water. It has spines which helps to reduce transpiration and all that. Okay, then option B says competition for sunlight. No, they don't actually compete for sunlight. Option C says lack of adequate water. Lack of adequate water. And I think that is the correct answer to this particular question. Lack of adequate water. Remember I said that one of the major challenge of xerophytes is availability of what? Water. So they lack adequate or enough water. Poor formation of roots, no, that's not really the issue. So the correct answer is C. That's the correct option. Next, fishes survive in water mainly because they possess. Fishes survive in water mainly because they possess. Now, if you look at all these options, they are all necessary for fishes to actually survive. We have streamlined bodies, they need it. So as for easy movement in water, the scales are actually needed to also regulate temperature and every other thing. Then we have the fins, they are used for swimming. We have the gills for gaseous exchange. But among all these features, which are very important, there is actually one that stands out, Now, if you look at it, the fish, what they actually need for survival. In fact, the fish cannot move very well, cannot have the energy to move and do any other thing or regulate, carry out metabolic activities without oxygen. And what did we say oxygen is for? The main purpose for oxygen is for respiration. It helps to break down complex food substances in order to release energy. And this energy is needed to carry out metabolic activities. So the particular feature that is actually needed by plants for survival in water is option D. Option D is the correct answer, which is the gills. And that is for respiration or gaseous exchange. Next question is, which of the following instruments is not used in measuring abiotic factors in a habitat. Now, this particular question, you can see that you can read it up in basic ecological concepts under the topic of ecological factors. You know, we have two types of ecological factors or components of ecological factors. We have biotic and abiotic factors. Now, abiotic factors include climatic factors, edaphic factors, topographic factors, and so on, while the biotic factors are the living factors. But in this case, we're not talking about living factors. Now, these abiotic factors can be measured. They can be measured. And what we're actually looking at has to do with instruments used for measuring these abiotic factors. Now, the first one is thermometer. Now, thermometer is actually used to measure a climatic factor, which is temperature. It is used to measure temperature. Microscope is not used to measuring, it's not used for measuring anything. It is actually used to view. It is actually used to magnify so as to view microscopic organisms or organisms that cannot be seen with the naked eyes. There are several organisms you can't see with your naked eyes. You need an instrument called microscope. Now, these, after all, the organisms, they are biotic factors, okay? So microscope is incorrect. In fact, it is the correct answer we are actually looking at for. But let's still proceed to other options and see if there are something that can knock off that option B. Now, option C says hygrometer. Now, hygrometer is actually the instrument used for measuring relative humidity. Now, relative humidity is actually checking the amount of moisture or water content in the atmosphere. Now, there is an irony on this. As most times, some persons get confused with hygrometer and hydrometer, H-Y-D-R-O, and then hygrometer, H-Y-G-R-O. Now, H-Y-G-R-O, D-R-O is supposed to be for relative humidity. Relative humidity has to do with water. Hydro has to do with water. But hydrometer, hydro, H-Y-D-R-O, is for measuring relative density. Relative density. While hygrometer is used for measuring relative humidity. And relative density, relative humidity, they are all abiotic factors. And then finally, we have wind vane. Now, wind vane tells the direction of the wind. You've seen a structure like that before, where you have north, south, east, west, and then it tells when the wind is blowing, there is always the pointer. The pointer tells you which direction the wind is actually taking or actually coming from. Okay, so these are all instruments used for measuring abiotic factors, except option B, which is microscope, used for viewing or magnifying living organisms that are too small to view with your naked eyes. Next question. Which of the following soil types have a high capillarity? Now, please listen. The narrower a particular channel, or yes, a particular channel or tube or canal, the higher its capillarity. Okay? So the narrower a particular thing, the higher its what? Capillarity. If you put a liquid through it, the higher its capillarity. Now, if you look at all these different soil types, we have sandy soil, we have clay soil, we have silt soil, and then we have loam soil. Now, sandy soil, they have large pore spaces, P-O-R-E-S, pores, P-O-R-E spaces, while loamy soil, they're a bit moderate, and that's why sandy soil has lowest water retaining capability. Then if you look at silt and clay, the pore spaces of silt and clay are very small. And imagine what it looks like when you combine the two of them. So I told you, the narrower a particular pore space, all right, the higher the rate of capillarity. So the correct answer is a combination of both silt and clay, and that is option B. Option B. Okay, silt and clay. Next question. Now, look at this particular question. They said the capturing and digestion of insects by a pitcher plant is a special form of nutrition. That is, now, I actually mentioned initially about feeding mechanisms, and I think I gave you about 4 of them. We mentioned absorption mechanism, we mentioned sucking mechanism, we mentioned biting and chewing mechanism, we mentioned grinding mechanism. That was the last one. Now the 5th one is supposed to be trapping and absorbing mechanism. Now there are some organisms, mostly plants, there are some plants, ironically, that feed, they can't manufacture their own food, they don't. Okay, what they do is they feed on other organisms. And of course, I've mentioned to you we have 2 types of nutrition. We have autotrophic, we have heterotrophic. Autotrophic, they manufacture theirs, while heterotrophic, they don't manufacture, they depend on other organisms. So it simply means that pitcher plant is an organism or a plant that depends on other organisms for food. So it is not autotrophic, it is actually heterotrophic. Now, autotrophic, we have 2 types. We have chemosynthetic and photosynthetic. The difference is, in photosynthetic, it involves the use of light as energy. In chemosynthetic, they use inorganic substances as energy, okay? But both chemo and photosynthetic nutrition, they can manufacture their own food. Now, if you look at the options we have there, A and D are the wrong options. So the correct option should be between B and C. Now, saprophytic nutrition, remember we mentioned about saprophytes. We said they feed on dead and decaying tissues of other organisms, mostly animals. Now, if they feed on dead and decaying tissues, but the question did not say they capture and digest dead and decaying. They said they capture and digest insects. So that is heterotrophic what? Nutrition, and not saprophytic. So our correct answer is heterotrophic nutrition. Heterotrophic nutrition. 34. Which of the following organisms will be the producer in a food chain? Now, when you're looking at a food chain is actually a feeding relationship that actually shows a simple feeding relationship that shows the transfer of energy from a producer to final consumer. Now, please always note, in a food chain, the producer is always a green plant. Not just a plant. Fungi is a plant. Not just a plant, a green plant. So a fungi cannot become a producer. So now the question is, which of the following organism will be the producer in a food chain? A, is it goat? No, goat is not a green plant. B, is it maize? Yes, maize is a green plant. C, is it man? No. And D, is it bacterium? No. Bacterium is not a plant. Man is not a plant. Goat is not a plant. So the correct answer is B. 35. The rate of decomposition of dead organisms is faster in the tropical rainforest than in the biomes, because now what brings about decomposition in an organism is usually moisture, water, and temperature. Water and temperature. If the temperature is usually high, decomposition will take place fast. If there is water in the organism, decomposition will always take place. Now, watch this. One of the ways to preserve organisms or preserve food, like let's say meat, if you don't preserve the meat, it will decompose. Why will it decompose? Now, one of the ways we preserve them is refrigeration. When the temperature is very cool, microorganisms that bring about decompositions can't act on the food. Also, another way of preserving is drying. Okay, drying, you sun dry or you smoke dry. Now, the drying also removes moisture. Most microorganisms can actually carry out decompositions when the temperature is not just very high, when it is actually normal human body temperature, decompositions can take place, and also when there is moisture. So let's look out for those two options, those two information. Option A says of consistent cool temperature. No, when the temperature is consistently cool, it means that decomposition cannot take place. Option B says of the relatively constant daylight. No, decomposition has nothing to do whether it is day or night. Then option C says there are more plants. No, even if there are few plants, decomposition can also still take place. And then option D says of availability of moisture. Like I said, if the moisture content is high, decomposition tends to take place faster. So, moisture. All right. Next question. Now we have a structure or a diagram there. Now the diagram below are illustrations of organisms in a habitat. Now study them and answer the questions. Now look at this. The feeding relationship between an organism labeled 3. Now, organism labeled 3 is actually a bird, and number 4 is also a bird in the diagram, is feeding relationship. Now, if you look at this, this is wonderful. Now, if you look at this, this is actually food chain, a food chain. Okay? Roman figure 1 is a plant, which probably is a green plant. Roman figure 2 is a primary consumer. Roman figure 3 is a secondary consumer. Roman figure 4 is also a secondary consumer, a tertiary consumer. So this one might feed on Roman figure 4 might feed on Roman figure 2 or 3. Roman figure 3 feeds on Roman figure 2, and Roman figure 2 feeds on Roman figure 1. So the feeding relationship between the organisms labeled Roman figure 3 and 4 in the diagram is predation. This Roman figure 4 feeds on Roman figure 2. So it is predation and not mutualism. Mutualism is when both of them benefit from each other. Parasitism is when one derives benefit from another and harms the other one in the process. But predation is when one organism feeds on another organism. Saprophytism talks about dead remains of plants and animals. So Roman figure 4 feeds on Roman figure 3. So that's the correct answer, option C. Still the same diagram. The question is the producer in the diagram. You can see. So like I just said, this is a food chain, a diagram of a food chain. So the producer is actually a green plant, and that should be Roman figure 1. Now, why is it a producer? They said number Roman figure 1 because it contains the least amount of energy. Wrong. Roman figure 1 because option B, Roman figure 1, it uses sunlight to manufacture their own food. Remember, I told you that a producer is one that can manufacture its own food by sunlight. It is a green plant, and only green plants can manufacture their food using sunlight. So the correct answer to this question is B. But let's look at option C. So Roman figure 4, because it is the largest organism in the diagram. Wrong. It's not a producer. Rather, it's a consumer. And then Roman figure, option D says Roman figure 4, because it is an organism that receives the highest amount of sunlight. No, not true. So the correct answer is option B. Option B is the correct answer. Okay. Look at the next question. Which of the following activities is against the conservation of natural resources? Against conservation. Now, what is afforestation? It has to do with planting of trees in places where they have been removed. Option B says removal of trees. That's not a way of conserving natural resources, mostly as it relates to forest. So deforestation is one of the ways that are activities that is against conservation of natural resources. What is conservation? What is conservation of natural resources? Is to ensure the continuous availability of natural resources judicious use. It has to do with the judicious use of natural resources in order to ensure their continuous availability. Okay, so deforestation is not a judicious use. Okay, and it doesn't ensure continuous availability. So if there is continuous deforestation, it is going to bring about extinction of so many forest reserves. Okay, now look at option C. It says establishment of game reserves, and option D says contour plowing. So the correct answer is option B. All right, now the next one, we now have use the information below to answer the question. Roman figure 1 said making shoes from crocodile skin. Roman figure 2 says making tables with plastic. Roman figure 3 says using elephant tusk for decoration. Roman figure 4 says using firewood for cooking. Now, the act that should be encouraged for the conservation of wildlife and forest. What should be encouraged? Now, this is still conservation of natural resources. For wildlife and forest is making tables with plastics. Now, if you say your answer is Roman figure 1, which is wrong, that's you're destroying wildlife, because there must be enough killing of crocodiles in order to get the crocodile skins for making shoes. Roman figure 2 is the correct answer. If you look at Roman figure 3, it means using elephant tusks for decoration. That means you have to kill a lot of elephants to get enough, so many elephant tusks for decoration of houses, palaces, and so on. And then also using firewood for cooking. Of course, a lot of people will have to eat, and then that's an act of deforestation, So the correct option that will help, or we should encourage for conservation of wildlife and forest, is making tables with what? Plastics. If you make tables with wood or timber, you are actually encouraging deforestation, and continuous deforestation without applying the principles of afforestation or reforestation is going to be a big problem. It's going to be a big problem in natural resources, mostly as it relates to wildlife and the forest. Okay, so the correct answer to this question is option 2. Also option B rather, which is Roman figure 2. All right. Next question. Use the information below to answer the question. Still the same. They said making shoes and all that. Now the question is, in order to avoid some of the acts that would have negative effects on conservation, government should do what? Negative effect. So what should government do to prevent negative effects? Enact and enforce laws towards conservation of natural resources. Very correct. Is it promote felling of trees? No. Without planting new ones? No. C says encouraging indiscriminate killing of wildlife. That's illegal hunting and poaching. And then D says encourage overutilization of forest reserve. No. So the correct thing the government should do to avoid some of the negative effects of conservation is to enact laws. No, there are some persons that go about doing illegal hunting, poaching, bush burning, okay, forest burning, and so on, deforestations, and so on. If the government enact and enforce these laws, it will help to reduce most of these crimes. So I believe the correct answer to this particular question is A. Next. Now, which of the following characteristics shows discontinuous variation in plants? Discontinuous variation in plants. Now, when we're talking about continuous and discontinuous variation, now discontinuous variation has to do with between two extremes. Okay, between two extremes. Now, one can be timid, and the other one can be very bold. One can be ability to taste PTC. That is, one can taste it, and the other one might tasting it. One taste it to be bitter, and the other one taste it there's tasteless. Okay. We also have ability to roll the tongue. These are all examples of discontinuous variation, where we have one can do this, one cannot do that. That's two extremes. There are no intermediates. okay? But in terms of continuous variation, there are intermediates, like you're talking about heights, okay? You can relate them. There is a progressive change, a progressive difference you can see. So someone might be very short, then there's also another person that is actually short, but not as short as the other one. Then you keep going till you get to the person that is actually tall. So you don't have two extremes. You just have a kind of a change, a process, okay? A kind of a gradual change, a progressive change, all right? So that's a continuous variation. But if you look at color, there is no intermediate. It's either you're black or you're white. It's either it is red, if the flower is red, or the flower is white. Unlike Mendel's experiment where you have red, pink, and the principles of incomplete dominance where you have red, pink, and white. But that's not what we're looking at. But when you look at flowers, colors of flowers, you have different colors. It is either is red or yellow. There is no intermediates. You is either red or white, or either blue or red, something like that. So we don't have intermediates. So color of flower is an example of a discontinuous variation, not leaf size, not fruit size. So anything that has to do with sizes and heights, okay, has to do with continuous variation. Next, they said a rhesus negative woman may experience stillbirth of the second child that is rhesus positive because, now the reason, because of, it says the woman is susceptible to diseases during pregnancy. No, rhesus factors doesn't cause diseases. And then B says the blood of the fetus might clump. Yes. And C says they have poor circulatory system. No. Then D says the fetus is deprived of nourishment. Not really. So the correct answer is B. Now the reason why it is B, now when a woman who is rhesus negative, they said stillbirth for the second birth, for the second child. Now the first child, if the first child is still positive, okay, for the woman, when she gave birth to the first child, the child will not experience a stillbirth. No, there will be no stillbirth. Because after the child's birth, the reason why the second will now have a stillbirth is actually because when she delivered the first one, she produced how will I put it, an antibody against the rhesus positive. Okay, so once she now takes in for the second child, at childbirth, when she wants to deliver the child, she will have a stillbirth because the blood of that particular child will start clumping together because of the antibodies that is being produced by the woman. Okay, so but there is actually a medical way to actually help her out. And that's why it's very important mothers go for antenatal care, antenatal care before childbirth, because this can be discovered and she can be helped in the process. I think one of the injections that can be given to her, I think that is immunoglobulin, something like that, that can be injected to her to actually help in her to have a safe delivery, So the correct answer is actually B. Now 43 says a sudden change in the genetic composition of an organism is actually termed mutation. Now mutation is actually based on changes in the DNA structure of an organism. And when there is actually a change, most times this change comes through when there is a replication of the DNA. Once it happens, it can bring about a sudden change. And this sudden change is usually permanent. It's a permanent sudden change. It is not epistasis. It is not linkage. Sex has nothing to do with sex linkage. It also has nothing to do with variation. Okay? But sometimes variation or mutation can bring about variation. All right. Now, next one, number 44, says paternity disputes could be resolved accurately through, it's not fingerprinting, it is not blood group, though blood group to an extent can help. Blood group to an extent can help resolve paternity disputes. But the one that can actually really solve the problem is a DNA test. A DNA test. Then we also have 45. Now, which is the name of what is the name rather of the genetic diagram? This is topic on genetics. You can see we've been talking on genetics for quite some time now. So still on genetics. Okay, sorry, just a minute. We said in 43, the answer is mutation. 44, the answer is DNA test, that's C. 45, we're looking at the diagram. Now, this diagram, if you are conversant with Mendel's law, Mendel's experiment, in monohybrid experiments, in dihybrid experiments, he made use of what we call the Punnett square method. Now, the Punnett square method was actually developed or propounded or brought into view, or will I say, developed by a man called Reginald Punnett. He's a British geneticist, and actually he came up with this genetic diagram, and it's really helpful. It will really help you when you're doing Mendel's dihybrid experiment, okay, on dihybrid experiment. Now, when you're using a simple genetic diagram, you can use it for simple crosses, but not on complex crosses. When you're doing a complex cross, you use the Punnett square method. So that's the Punnett square genetic diagram. Okay. Now look at this. They say, what do the labels Roman figure 1, 2, 3, and 4 respectively represent? Now look at Roman figure 1. Now you can see at the top that these are genetic traits. We have big E, capital letter E, capital letter E, capital letter E, small letter e. Now capital letter E here will cross with capital letter E, and we have capital letter E in Roman figure 1. So A, C, and D are considerable. Then in Roman figure 2, capital letter E will cross. We have capital letter E. So we also have A, C, and E are possible answers. Then Roman figure 3 is capital letter E, small letter e. Option D, C, option D and C are the possible answers. And then lastly, Roman figure 4, we have capital letter E, small letter e. The correct answer is option C. I hope you understand that. That is C. Still on genetic diagram or genetics, they said the genotypic ratio. Now, what is a genotype? Genotype is the genetic constitution of an organism. Genetic constitution of an organism. Now, when we're looking at the genotype, if you look at it here, we have in Roman figure 1 and Roman figure 2, we have big E, capital letter E rather, capital letter E, 2 ways. And then in Roman figure 3 and 4, we have capital letter E, small letter e, capital letter E, small letter e. If you look at that, that is 2:2, which when you simplify it, the ratio, it gives you 1:1. So 1:1 is the correct answer. And then 48, what is the probability of that that a pregnancy will result in a male child? Now, in males, we have XY chromosomes, and in female, we have XX chromosomes. When a male releases sperm cells, it is either X or Y. So the possibility is male and female, which is 2, but the two sex we're looking at is 2, but there is only one possibility of having a male or a female. So the probability here is 1:2. 1:2. A vestigial structure in human beings, in humans. Now, vestigial organs are organs that are actually not useful to man or to humans, or don't carry out specific functions. Now, for humans, we have 2 of them, I can remember. One of them is the appendix. The appendix, which is close to the large intestine, the appendix. It has no function. Okay, no known function up till now. And then we also have another one, which is the tailbone. The tailbone, that's the caudal bone. it has no function. Now, most persons, based on evolution, believes that the tailbone and the appendix are actually organs that were functional in early ancestral origins, okay? Now, they believe that man was not actually created. Man actually evolved from pre-existing forms and structure. And these are all somehow evidences that actually man pre-existed in other forms. And that with time, man no longer made use of some of these structures like the tailbone. You know, it is believed that man was once other forms of animals with a tail, and with time it became shortened as man began to evolve and change, series of changes in structures, in form, in behavior, and all that. And the tail was no longer needed, and it became shortened. And if you look at the structure of the bone or the skeleton in humans, you will discover that the bone, the anal bone, is actually shortened. It's actually shortened. Okay, so that is one of the evidence of evolution, evidence of vestigial organs. So the correct answer to this question is tailbone, tailbone. And then finally, the following activities are associated with termites except. Now, termites undergo what we call nuptial flight. Now, nuptial flight is actually a flight they do at a particular season, mostly breeding season, where they fly out, the reproductives actually fly out, pair together in order to mate and form their different colonies. Termites also communicate. Option B says communication. They communicate, they search for food, option D. But termites don't undergo pollination. Pollination is exclusively reserved for flowering plants. And termites are not flowering plants. Pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from the anther to the stigma of a flower, of a plant. So this is where we're going to call it a wrap-up in this exercise. I hope you actually enjoyed my this time with me. And I hope you learned something new. And I will also encourage that you keep practicing using past questions to practice and prepare yourself for upcoming exams. Bye for now. Thank you.